The air is thick with the hushed anticipation of a verdict. Fluorescent lights hum above, casting a stark, unforgiving glow on the proceedings. Every seat in the gallery is packed. A throng of reporters, their cameras poised like predators, jostle for position. At the defendant's table sits Lieutenant Mitchell, 40s, his once imposing figure now appearing strangely diminished. His neatly pressed uniform seems to mock him, a uniform he once wore with an arrogant swagger. Sweat beads on his brow, though the courtroom is cool. His eyes dart around, desperate for an escape, for a friendly face, for anything but the inevitable. His jaw is clenched so tightly, the muscles in his neck ripple. The judge, a woman of stern demeanor, clears her throat. The rustling ceases. All eyes are on her, then on Mitchell. Judge, voice resonating with authority. On the charge of conspiracy to obstruct justice, abuse of power, and systemic racial discrimination, this court finds the defendant, Lieutenant Thomas Mitchell, guilty. The single word, guilty, hangs in the air like a death knell. A collective gasp, followed by a torrent of camera flashes and the murmur of reporters, erupts. Mitchell's face, which minutes ago held a desperate flicker of hope, contorts into a mask of pure, unadulterated horror. His world, built on a foundation of perceived invincibility, shatters. He scrambles to his feet, eyes wide, mouth agape, but no sound escapes him. He looks like a cornered animal, utterly broken. His gaze, wild and unfocused, sweeps across the gallery. It lands, finally, on a figure in the front row. Karima Shah, 30s, federal investigator, sits composed, regal, and utterly impassive. Her dark suit is impeccable, her posture perfect. There's no triumph in her eyes, only a cold, measured calculation. She meets Mitchell's terrified gaze with an unwavering stare that seems to pierce through him, right into his hollowed-out soul. It's the gaze of someone who saw this outcome long ago, meticulously engineered it, and now merely observes its inevitable conclusion. Mitchell's face drains of all color. He doesn't just see her. Karima scrolled through it, her expression unreadable. Mugshots of uniformed officers flashed past. Officer Reynolds, 30s, beefy, a smirk perpetually etched on his face. Officer Donovan, 20s, younger, but with an unsettlingly vacant stare that suggested either dullness or malice. Then came Lieutenant Thomas Mitchell, 40s. His photograph, an official headshot, showed a man with a square jaw, cold eyes, and a barely perceptible hint of disdain playing around his lips. He looked like a man who believed himself beyond reproach, beyond consequence. The reports detailed a litany of grievances: racial profiling, questionable arrests, excessive force complaints routinely dismissed, missing evidence, suspicious internal affairs rulings, and a concerning pattern of intimidation tactics against local activists and minority communities. Blackwood's 17th precinct wasn't just underperforming, it was rotten to the core. Mitchell wasn't just a bad cop. He was the festering heart of a localized, self-sustaining system of injustice. Karima's federal credentials as a senior investigator for the Department of Justice's Civil Rights Division granted her unparalleled access and authority. She wasn't here to file a report. She was here to dismantle. Her approach was always surgical: observe, collect, confirm, then strike. And she had never, not once, failed to bring down her target. She paused on a particular section of the dossier: witness intimidation and lack of cooperation from local government officials. This was the local, corrupt system that protected Mitchell, the invisible web of power and fear that had allowed him to operate with impunity for so long. She knew her arrival had to be discreet. She had to experience their particular brand of injustice firsthand, not as an investigator, but as one of the unimportant citizens they routinely abused. Only then would she truly understand the extent of their arrogance and the depth of their belief in their own untouchability. Only then could she activate the mechanism that would bring their carefully constructed world crashing down. She closed the dossier, the image of Mitchell's arrogant smirk lingering in her mind. Her gaze returned to the map, tracing the streets of Blackwood. Tomorrow, she would become just another face in its struggling community, another potential victim. And they would never see her coming. The sun, now higher in the sky, cast long shadows down Main Street. Karima, dressed in a simple, unassuming dark blue hoodie and jeans, blended seamlessly with the few pedestrians. She carried a worn backpack, a prop to enhance her ordinary citizen persona. Her movements were deliberate, her stride confident but not defiant. She walked past the local diner, a sleepy laundromat, and a boarded-up storefront, her eyes subtly observing everything. The lack of security cameras on certain corners, the general state of disrepair, the way local residents averted their gaze when a police cruiser slowly passed by. Her target intersection was approaching, a slightly rundown area near the town's small, public park, known for minor loitering and occasional petty crime. A perfect spot for a routine police presence. As if on cue, a gleaming Blackwood PD cruiser, Unit 17-03, rounded the corner. It moved slowly, deliberately, its occupants seemingly scanning the street for any deviation from their perceived order. Karima remained calm, continuing her walk, maintaining eye contact only briefly before looking away, as any unassuming citizen might. The cruiser pulled up beside her, its tires softly crunching on the gravelly shoulder. The window hissed down. Officer Reynolds, 30s, beefy, with a thin mustache and eyes that held a cold, assessing gleam, leaned out. Officer Donovan, 20s, sat silently beside him, a blank look on his face, though his gaze was fixed on Karima. Reynolds, voice laced with a practiced condescension. "Afternoon, ma'am. You seem a little lost. Don't see many folks like yourself wandering these parts." Karima stopped, turning slowly. She allowed a flicker of mild annoyance to cross her face, but kept her voice even, controlled. "Karima, just enjoying a walk. Is there a problem, officer?" Reynolds smirked, exchanging a glance with Donovan, who offered a barely perceptible nod. Reynolds, "Problem? Not yet. Just being proactive. You know, keeping our streets safe. Were you headed in such a hurry?" Karima, calmly, "Nowhere in particular. Just exploring the town." Reynolds, his tone dripping with thinly veiled skepticism. "Exploring? Right. Got any ID on you, explorer?" Karima hesitated for a beat, a carefully calculated delay. She reached into her backpack, retrieving a standard state ID. It was a genuine ID, but one registered to a nondescript residential address several towns over, part of her deep cover. She handed it to him. Reynolds took it, scrutinizing it with an exaggerated slowness, his finger tracing the edges. Reynolds, Karima Shaw. Interesting name. From Miller's Creek. That's a bit of a drive, isn't it? What brings a city girl all the way out here to Blackwood? Looking for something special? The insinuation hung in the air, a subtle but unmistakable jab at her race and her perceived outsider status. It wasn't an accusation, but an undercurrent of suspicion designed to disorient and intimidate. Karima, just passing through. I enjoy quiet towns. Reynolds, chuckles, a dry, humorless sound. Quiet. We like to keep it that way. Mostly. So, no specific business? No. Relatives in the area? The subtext was clear. He was asking if she had any ties to the local minority community, hinting at profiling. Karima's eyes remained steady. Karima, no, just myself. Suddenly, the cruiser's radio crackled. A voice, gruff and authoritative, came through. Radio, OS. 17-03, what's your status? You got a situation? Reynolds pressed the mic. Reynolds, negative, Lieutenant. Just a routine stop. Got a tourist. From out of town. Looks a little out of place. A brief pause. Then, the distinct voice of Lieutenant Mitchell, hard and dismissive, came through. Mitchell, OS. Out of place. Reynolds, don't waste my time with out of place. If she's not causing trouble, move on. Or make her cause trouble, then move on. You know the drill. Reynolds's face tightened for a moment, a flash of annoyance at being subtly chastised, even if by a superior. He handed Karima back her ID, but not before subtly letting it drop to the ground. Karima bent down, picking it up without a word. As she straightened, Mitchell's cruiser, Unit 17-01, pulled up directly behind Reynolds's. Mitchell himself stepped out, his uniform pristine, his presence radiating an almost casual authority. He had the kind of eyes that missed nothing and judged everything. Mitchell, approaching, a predatory smile playing on his lips. What seems to be the hold-up, gentlemen? Everything under control? He looked at Karima, his gaze sweeping over her with an unsettling possessiveness, as if she were an object of mild curiosity rather than a person. Reynolds. Just checking ID, Lieutenant. This woman, Karima Shaw, from Miller's Creek, says she's just exploring. Mitchell's eyes narrowed slightly as he looked at Karima. The previous insults from Reynolds felt like playful jabs compared to Mitchell's cold, calculating stare. This wasn't just profiling. It was an assessment of vulnerability. Mitchell. To Karima, his voice smooth but edged with menace. Miller's Creek, huh? That's a good drive. You know, we've had some incidents lately. People coming into Blackwood, stirring things up. We don't like troublemakers here. We like things quiet, predictable. He stepped closer, invading her personal space, his gaze locked on hers. It was a power play, a psychological intimidation. Mitchell, you wouldn't happen to be one of those activists, would you? Got a camera hidden somewhere? Planning to write a scathing report on our fine police department? The question was rhetorical, designed to unnerve. Karima met his gaze, unflinching, though her heart hammered a silent rhythm beneath her ribs. She was acting, but the threat felt undeniably real. This was precisely the kind of systemic arrogance she had come to expose. Karima, voice clear, betraying no fear, only a touch of weary indignation. I am a law-abiding citizen. I have no camera, no hidden agenda. I just want to be left alone. Mitchell let out a short, sharp laugh, a sound devoid of humor. Mitchell, left alone. That's funny. In Blackwood, you get left alone when we decide you get left alone, or when you mind your business. And right now, your business seems to be making my officers uncomfortable. He snapped his fingers at Reynolds. Mitchell. Reynolds, take her in. Obstruction of a police investigation. Or loitering with intent. Whatever you like. We'll sort out her business down at the station. And while you're at it, give her a full cavity search, just to make sure she's not hiding anything important. The command hung in the air, a blatant abuse of power, a deeply humiliating and sexually charged threat delivered with casual indifference. Donovan's blank stare remained, but Reynolds's smirk returned, wider, more predatory. He stepped towards Karima, reaching for her arm. Karima's eyes flickered, just for a split second, a minuscule tremor of genuine fury piercing through her calm facade. But it vanished as quickly as it appeared. She knew this was it. This was the catalyst. She offered no resistance as Reynolds's hand closed roughly around her arm, pulling her towards the patrol car. She moved stiffly, deliberately, every muscle screaming defiance, yet her body remained compliant. As Reynolds opened the cruiser's back door, Mitchell leaned in close, his voice a low, venomous hiss, meant only for her. Mitchell, welcome to Blackwood, Miss Shaw. You picked the wrong town to get curious. Karima said nothing. As she was roughly pushed into the back seat, her gaze, momentarily meeting Mitchell's, held a chilling, almost imperceptible promise. He saw only a defeated woman. She saw a dead man walking. The interrogation room was claustrophobic, reeking faintly of stale coffee and desperation. A single, bare bulb hung precariously overhead, casting harsh shadows. Karima sat on a cold metal chair, facing a chipped, unvarnished table. Her backpack lay on the floor beside her. She had been processed, fingerprinted, photographed, and subjected to the humiliating, intrusive search Mitchell had ordered, though it was carried out by a female officer. Throughout it all, she had maintained an unnerving composure, a blank slate that frustrated her captors. Reynolds and Donovan had left her alone for what felt like an hour, an intentional tactic to amplify her discomfort. They clearly expected her to break, to beg, to display some form of fear or subservience. They would be disappointed. The door creaked open. Reynolds entered, carrying a flimsy folder, a self-satisfied smirk on his face. Donovan stood just behind him, arms crossed, observing. Reynolds, thumping the folder onto the table. Well, Miss Shaw, we've got you on resisting arrest now, and disorderly conduct. Maybe even conspiracy to commit public nuisance. We're flexible. He leaned across the table, invading her space. Reynolds, you know, this could all go away if you just tell us what you're really doing here, and maybe apologize for wasting our valuable time. We're busy men, keeping this town safe from outside elements. Karima looked at him, her eyes unblinking. Her voice, when it came, was soft, almost a whisper, yet it cut through the room like ice. Karima, I believe you've already made your intentions clear, and I have nothing to apologize for. Reynolds scoffed, straightening up. Reynolds. Suit yourself. You can spend the night in lockup thinking about it. Maybe you'll be more cooperative in the morning. Or maybe you'll just be another Blackwood statistic. Happens all the time. People come here, 'cause of fuss, then they just disappear from public record. He turned to leave, a final power play. Just as his hand reached the doorknob, Karima spoke again, her voice still quiet, but now imbued with a subtle, chilling undertone. Karima. To Reynolds, without raising her voice. You should know, Officer Reynolds, that I remember everything. Every word, every action, every threat, and I have an excellent memory for detail. Reynolds paused, his hand still on the doorknob. He turned slowly, a hint of irritation, but still confidence, on his face. Reynolds. Is that a threat, Miss Shaw? Because threats don't go over well in Blackwood. Karima offered him a faint, almost imperceptible smile. It wasn't a smile of amusement, but of grim, determined satisfaction. Karima. No, it's a promise. Reynolds stared at her for a moment longer, a flicker of something unreadable in his eyes, before he shook his head and exited, slamming the door shut. The lock clicked, plunging Karima back into solitary silence. Int. Blackwood PD. Holding cell. Later night. Hours passed. Karima was eventually moved to a holding cell, a grimy cubicle with a steel cot. The air was stale, the silence broken only by the distant sounds of the precinct. She lay on the cot, seemingly asleep, but her mind was racing, replaying every moment of the day's encounters. The microaggressions, the condescension, the thinly veiled threats, Mitchell's casual command for a cavity search. All of it was meticulously catalogued, cross-referenced with the existing dossier. They had not just confirmed her suspicions, they had provided irrefutable, first-hand evidence of their rot. And they had done it while unknowingly serving as unwitting actors in their own downfall. Her hand, as if by instinct, moved under the collar of her hoodie, feeling for a small, almost invisible device sewn into the lining. It was a secure, encrypted satellite communicator, standard issue for federal agents operating deep cover. She had managed to activate it during the initial pat-down at the station, a momentary distraction created by a feigned stumble. The signal was weak in the cell, but it was enough. With practiced, almost imperceptible movements, her thumb pressed a sequence of barely raised buttons. Each press was a precise command, a pre-programmed alert. It wasn't a call for help, it was an activation code. The device vibrated subtly. A tiny, almost silent beep confirmed transmission. Confirmed, mission parameters met. Federal override protocol initiated. Priority level alpha. A ghost of a smile touched Karima's lips. This wasn't about revenge, it was about justice. The corrupt local system, protecting Mitchell and his cronies, had just been directly challenged by a higher, impartial authority. An authority that operated with quiet efficiency, far beyond the reach of Blackwood's self-appointed kings. She closed her eyes, not to sleep, but to mentally prepare for the storm that was about to break. Lieutenant Mitchell and his crew had just invited the wolf into the henhouse, and she was about to show them exactly what a wolf could do. Int. Blackwood PD, 17th Precinct, morning. The air in the 17th Precinct's bullpen was usually thick with the scent of stale coffee, cheap donuts, and the bluster of confident authority. Today, there was an unfamiliar undercurrent, a faint whisper of unease. Lieutenant Mitchell sat in his office, door ajar, barking orders at Officer Donovan, who looked even more lost than usual. Mitchell, voice booming slightly. And for God's sake, Donovan, clean up that damn evidence locker. We've got some pencil pushers coming in. Federal, probably looking for a reason to cut our budget. Make sure everything's squared away. Donovan, nodding quickly. Yes, Lieutenant. Right away. Mitchell grunted, dismissing him with a wave. He leaned back in his chair, a smug look on his face. He'd just finished a call with Captain Davies, his longtime associate and unofficial protector at headquarters. Davies had assured him it was just a routine audit, a formality from the Department of Justice, probably triggered by some anonymous online complaint. Nothing to worry about. Just send them back to Washington with their tails between their legs. Int. Precinct bullpen, later morning. The main bullpen was a hive of controlled chaos. Officers clattering at keyboards, phones ringing, the occasional shout. Officer Reynolds, looking fresh and radiating his usual arrogance, was at his desk, recounting his triumph from the previous day to a junior officer. Reynolds. And then Mitchell comes in, right? And tells me to take her in. Obstruction, he says. Just like that. You should have seen her face. Thought she was hot stuff, but she shut right up when she realized who she was dealing with. Just another loudmouth from out of town. He chuckled, and the junior officer forced a nervous laugh. Suddenly, a crisp, professional voice cut through the background noise. Voice OS. Excuse me, is Lieutenant Mitchell available? Reynolds looked up, annoyed. Standing in the middle of the bullpen was Karima Shaw. She wore a tailored charcoal pantsuit, a crisp white blouse, and her hair was pulled into a sleek, authoritative bun. Her expression was neutral, but her presence was a stark contrast to her previous appearance. Reynolds did a double take. He recognized the face, but not the aura. This wasn't the same woman he'd humiliated yesterday. This woman exuded an undeniable gravitas. Reynolds, stammering slightly. Who are you? And what do you want with the lieutenant? Karima's gaze, cool and appraising, landed on Reynolds. There was no recognition in her eyes, only the professional detachment of someone observing a minor irritant. Karima. Voice clear, precise. My name is Karima Shaw. I'm a senior investigator with the Department of Justice. I'm here to commence the scheduled audit of the 17th Precinct. I believe the lieutenant was informed of my arrival. The words hung in the air, each one a subtle hammer blow. Reynolds's face, usually flushed with self-importance, slowly drained of color. His jaw went slack. The junior officer next to him looked like he'd seen a ghost. Karima didn't wait for a response. She walked directly towards Mitchell's open office door, her stride purposeful. She paused in the doorway. Mitchell, looking up from his desk, annoyed. Can I help you? I'm a little busy here. Karima offered him a polite, yet utterly unyielding, smile. Karima. Lieutenant Mitchell, I'm Karima Shaw, Department of Justice. As per federal mandate, I'm here to oversee a comprehensive audit of your precinct's operations, financial records, and internal affairs protocols. My office will be set up in the vacant conference room. I'll need full access to all personnel, documents, and digital files, starting immediately. Mitchell's confident facade wavered. He stared at her, then back at his desk, then back at her. The name Karima Shaw echoed in his mind, but his brain, clouded by arrogance, simply couldn't connect it to the troublemaker he'd ordered arrested yesterday. He saw a sharp, federal bureaucrat, a necessary nuisance. He didn't see his judge. Mitchell, regaining some composure, though a flicker of annoyance remained. Investigator Shaw. Yes, Captain Davies mentioned you were coming. Bit of short notice. We'll, make sure you have everything you need. Donovan, set up the conference room for Ms. Shaw, and make sure she gets all the paperwork she's asking for. Every last page. He emphasized the last part with a dismissive wave, clearly believing he was being magnanimous and subtly signaling to his team that they had nothing to hide. He still thought this was a superficial check, easily managed. Karima's smile didn't falter. She simply nodded. Karima. Thank you, Lieutenant. I appreciate your full cooperation. I look forward to working closely with your team. She turned and, with an almost imperceptible glance at Reynolds, who was still frozen in disbelief, walked towards the designated conference room. She had made her entrance. The first, subtle crack in their carefully constructed reality had appeared. Mitchell, blind to the true nature of the threat, had just welcomed the very force designed to dismantle him into the heart of his domain. He saw an auditor. She was the activation key. Int. Blackwood PD. Conference room. Days later. The conference room, once a dusty storage space, had been transformed into Karima's temporary command center. Mountains of files, digital and physical, were systematically arranged. 2 laptops hummed, displaying complex spreadsheets and databases. The air was thick with the scent of paper and metadata. Days had blurred into a relentless cycle of meticulous examination. Karima, dressed in a fresh, but equally severe, pantsuit each day, worked with an almost surgical precision. She barely slept, fueling herself on black coffee and an unwavering focus. Officer Donovan, assigned to assist her, shuffled in with another stack of boxes labeled Arrest Records, Q4. He looked exhausted, his usual vacant stare replaced by a twitchy nervousness. He placed them heavily on a table. Donovan, voice low, almost a whisper. Here are the Q4 arrests, Investigator Shaw. Miller, muttering. Ghost. That's Mitchell's informant. Been around for years. Real good at what he does. Gets results. Karima. Pressing. Gets results. But no paperwork. No chain of custody for tips. And the results often seem to primarily target individuals who have previously filed complaints against the department. Miller looked trapped. He wanted to speak, but fear was etched on his face. Miller. Voice barely audible. Look, investigator, some things are best left alone. Lieutenant Mitchell runs a tight ship. And if you ask too many questions, well, it gets complicated. Karima leaned forward, her voice dropping to a calm, persuasive tone. Karima. Complicated for whom, Sergeant? For justice? Or for those who profit from its absence? I'm not asking for rumors. I'm asking for facts. And I promise you, Sergeant, I will get them. With or without your help. But if you choose to obstruct a federal investigation, the complications will extend to you. Miller's eyes darted around the room, then finally, fearfully, met Karima's. The fear was real, but so was a glimmer of something else, a flicker of conscience, long suppressed. He didn't speak, but his silence was more eloquent than any confession. He nodded, almost imperceptibly, indicating he understood the gravity of her words. He knew she was uncovering something deep, something that had been buried for years. Outside her office, Karima could feel the atmosphere in the precinct shifting. The initial indifference had morphed into irritation, then to open nervousness. Officers Reynolds and Donovan avoided her gaze, their confident swagger replaced by a hesitant step. Mitchell himself, while still maintaining a veneer of control, began to send agitated glances towards her closed door. He started making more frequent, whispered phone calls, his voice strained. He still saw her as a temporary annoyance, a bureaucratic hurdle, but he was slowly, inexorably, beginning to feel the ground shift beneath his feet. The first cracks were expanding into fissures, and the skeletons in Blackwood's closet were beginning to rattle. Int. Blackwood Public Library Day. Karima sat in the hushed, cavernous space of the Blackwood Public Library, surrounded by towering shelves of forgotten books. Her laptop was open, displaying news archives and public records. The library offered a neutral, anonymous space away from the suffocating atmosphere of the precinct. Her investigation had unearthed a particularly disturbing pattern. A series of unsolved or closed cases over the past 5 years involving minority victims, often with similar circumstances, vague reports, no significant follow-up, and a convenient lack of evidence. These were the ghosts of Blackwood, the story swept under the rug by Mitchell's system. She focused on a specific case, the disappearance of a young woman named Nia Johnson 3 years prior. Nia had been a vocal community activist, outspoken against police brutality. Her case had been closed as a voluntary disappearance, despite her family insisting she would never abandon them. Karima reached out to Nia's family, arranging a discreet meeting at a small, out-of-the-way cafe on the outskirts of Blackwood. Int. The Dewdrop Cafe Day. Karima sat across from Nia's mother, Mrs. Johnson, 50s, her face etched with years of grief and frustration, and Nia's younger brother, Marcus, 20s, whose eyes held a simmering anger. Mrs. Johnson, voice trembling. They said she left. Like she packed a bag and walked away from everything. But Nia wouldn't. She loved us. She loved this town, even with all its problems. That's why she spoke out. Marcus, voice tight with suppressed rage. They didn't even look, Miss Shaw. They came to the house, took a statement, and that was it. Lieutenant Mitchell himself told us to stop making trouble. Said Nia was probably with a boyfriend, just being dramatic. Karima, gently. Did you ever report any prior incidents involving Nia and the police? Any threats? Marcus nodded, clenching his fists. Marcus, all the time. They'd pull her over for nothing, give her tickets, follow her. Mitchell even stopped her once after a community meeting. Told her he knew where she lived, that he knew her type. Karima listened, meticulously noting every detail. This wasn't just abuse of power, it was a campaign of psychological terror, culminating in a deliberately botched investigation to silence a critic. The pieces were beginning to fall into place. Mrs. Johnson, tears welling up. We tried to tell internal affairs, but they just ignored us. Said it was he said, she said. Told us to go home. Karima, meeting her gaze firmly. Mrs. Johnson, Marcus, I understand why you're scared. But I want you to know something. I'm not internal affairs. And I don't ignore anything. I believe you. And I'm going to find out what happened to Nia. And to everyone else they tried to silence. Her words, delivered with quiet conviction, seemed to break through years of bottled-up despair. Marcus and Mrs. Johnson looked at each other, a fragile spark of hope igniting in their eyes. Karima then provided them, I am well aware of how things work here, Lieutenant. I've spent my career dismantling precisely these kinds of safeguards. And as for outsiders meddling, consider me a necessary surgical instrument. You, Lieutenant, are the tumor. And the entire system that protected you, the one that allowed Nia Johnson to disappear and countless others to suffer in silence, is the disease. And I am here to eradicate it. Mitchell stared at her, genuinely speechless. The arrogance that had fueled his entire career was finally beginning to crack under the relentless, calm assault of Karima's truth. He saw not just an adversary, but an existential threat. The invisible war had just gotten very, very visible. Int. Blackwood PD. Conference room/bullpen, continuous. The atmosphere in the 17th precinct was now thick with an almost palpable tension. Karima's presence, once a dismissible annoyance, had become a looming shadow. Mitchell's bluster had given way to a palpable anxiety. He barked orders more frequently, his voice sharper, his eyes constantly darting towards Karima's closed conference room door. Officer Reynolds and Donovan were jumpy, whispering in corners, avoiding eye contact with anyone, especially Karima. Karima, meanwhile, intensified her efforts. The digital trail she was meticulously following led her beyond the precinct, deep into the city's financial and political structures. She discovered shell corporations linked to local contractors who consistently won lucrative city contracts, often for inflated prices. These same contractors had made significant campaign donations to key city council members and, tellingly, to Captain Davies's re-election fund when he ran for a higher position years ago. She began to discreetly leak anonymous tips, not to the national press yet, but to local, independent journalists who had previously tried, and failed, to expose corruption in Blackwood. These were carefully curated, irrefutable pieces of information. A discrepancy in a public tender, an unusually high police overtime payment for a non-existent event, a pattern of confidential informant payouts that vanished into thin air. EXT, Blackwood Local Newspaper Office Day. A local reporter, Sarah Chun, 30s, who had long suspected corruption but lacked the smoking gun, received an anonymous, encrypted email containing a spreadsheet. The spreadsheet meticulously detailed the missing cash from drug busts, cross-referenced with Mitchell's and Davies's personal financial anomalies. Sarah's eyes widened as she scrolled through the data. This wasn't a rumor. This was evidence. Int. Blackwood City Council meeting night. A routine city council meeting, usually sparsely attended, was now packed. Sarah Chun was there, alongside a handful of angry citizens, many of whom Karima had discreetly contacted. Sarah, emboldened by the anonymous data, stood up during the public comment section. Sarah Chun, voice clear, though nervous. I have received information, credible information, suggesting a deep pattern of financial malfeasance within our police department, potentially extending to higher echelons of city government. I'm talking about missing funds, suspicious contracts, and a disturbing lack of accountability. We, the citizens, demand transparency. The council members, including the mayor, looked visibly uncomfortable. The mayor glanced nervously at Captain Davies, who was present, sitting grim-faced in the audience. Int. Blackwood PD, Mitchell's office day. Mitchell was on the phone, his face a mask of barely controlled fury. He was shouting, but the words were muffled. He slammed the phone down. Mitchell, muttering to himself, God damn it, Davies. Get a handle on this. He paced his office, a caged tiger. The annoying auditor was no longer just an auditor. The city was buzzing. The local newspaper was running articles with titles like Questions Surround Blackwood PD Finances, and the whispers were turning into shouts. He still didn't connect Karima, the federal agent, with the woman he'd arrested, but he knew she was the source of his current misery. Suddenly, his door opened again. Karima stood there, a folder in her hand. Her expression was calm, almost serene, a stark contrast to Mitchell's agitated state. Karima, Lieutenant, I've just completed my review of your internal affairs dismissal records. Specifically, the cases handled by Captain Davies. I've found a significant number of these dismissals to be highly questionable, especially the ones involving the use of excessive force and racial profiling. Mitchell, already at his breaking point, exploded. Mitchell, pointing a furious finger at her. You're behind all this. These anonymous tips, these reporters. You're trying to destroy everything. I've been doing this job for 20 years. We have a system here. Karima, stepping into the office, her voice chillingly calm. Indeed, Lieutenant. You have a system. A system built on intimidation, corruption, and the systematic denial of justice. A system that protected you, Officer Reynolds, Officer Donovan, and others. A system that allowed a young woman named Nia Johnson to disappear without proper investigation. And a system, I might add, that appears to extend all the way up to Captain Davies and potentially beyond. Mitchell's eyes, wide with rage, now flickered with a desperate, dawning horror. She had said Nia Johnson's name. She knew. She knew everything. The true scale of her investigation, the depth of her penetration into their corrupt network, was finally becoming terrifyingly clear. Mitchell, voice dropping to a desperate whisper. What do you want? What is this? Karima, taking another step closer, her gaze unwavering. Justice, Lieutenant. Something that has been sorely lacking in Blackwood. Your system is collapsing. And unlike your internal affairs department, Lieutenant, my investigation won't be dismissed. It's backed by the full force of the federal government. And it's only just beginning. She turned, leaving Mitchell standing in his office, completely undone. His face was a ghastly white, the realization hitting him with the force of a physical blow. The annoying auditor was not just a meddler. She was a silent, relentless force, methodically dismantling his entire world, piece by painful piece. And he had no idea how to stop her. His reign of terror, built on a foundation of untouchability, was crumbling. Lieutenant Mitchell was a man unraveling. The precinct was a ghost town, most officers having gone home, leaving behind a heavy silence. His desk was cluttered with empty coffee cups, crumpled reports, and a half-eaten sandwich. He stared at his phone, a dozen numbers he wanted to call, but no one he dared trust. Captain Davies had stopped returning his calls. The mayor's office had become frigidly polite. He was alone, exposed. His initial fury at Karima had morphed into a chilling fear. He still didn't fully grasp her true authority, blinded by his own superiority complex, but he knew she was the pivot point of his destruction. He had to stop her, had to discredit her, before she brought everything down. A plan, desperate and reckless, began to form in his mind. He recalled the humiliation she had endured at his command, the outsider status. He would turn that against her. He would paint her as a rogue agent, a biased federal operative, using her position to enact personal revenge. He called Officer Reynolds, his voice low and urgent. Mitchell OS. Reynolds, get down here. Now. And don't tell anyone. Int. Blackwood PD, Mitchell's office, later night. Reynolds entered Mitchell's office, looking nervous. The swagger he usually carried was gone. Reynolds. You called, Lieutenant? Mitchell. Voice hoarse, eyes bloodshot. She's destroying us, Reynolds. This federal bitch. She's going to take down everyone, including us, unless we stop her. Tonight. Reynolds swallowed hard. Reynolds. What do you have in mind, Lieutenant? Mitchell pulled out a small, unlabeled evidence bag. Inside were a few small, clear baggies containing a white powdery substance. Mitchell. A sinister glint in his eyes. She's been spending a lot of time alone in that conference room, hasn't she? Late nights. No one watching. She's arrogant. Thinks she's untouchable. Reynolds' eyes widened as he understood. A planted frame-up. Reynolds. You want to plant drugs on her? In her office? Mitchell. Nodding slowly, a grim smile forming. Not just drugs. We'll find a small amount of cash, too. Evidence tampering. Bribery. It'll look like she's trying to discredit us. Or worse, that she's involved herself. A federal agent, caught with evidence from her own case. Who would believe her then? It'll blow up in her face, and the feds will have to pull her out. End of story. Reynolds. Hesitantly. But, Lieutenant, she's a federal agent. They won't just believe it. Mitchell. Slamming his fist on the desk. They'll have to. It's her word against ours. And we've got the badges, the authority. We'll say she resisted, tried to destroy the evidence. We'll make it stick. We always do. We've done worse, Reynolds. We've always gotten away with it. His desperate belief in his own invulnerability, fueled by years of successful cover-ups, blinded him to the true nature of his adversary. This was his fatal error. No, Lieutenant Mitchell. You just made yours. You see, I am not under arrest. You, however, are. And so are Officer Reynolds and Officer Donovan. This entire conversation, your pathetic attempt at a frame-up, has been recorded. Every word, every action. And thanks to the discreet cameras I had installed, every visual as well. Mitchell, Reynolds, and Donovan stared at the recorder, then at the badge, then at Karima. Their faces, already pale with fear, drained of every last drop of color. They finally understood. The woman they had humiliated, the outsider they had despised, was not just an auditor. She was the one who had been building their cage, piece by piece, from the moment she first met them. Their arrogance had led them directly into her trap. Karima slowly rose to her feet, her presence filling the room with an undeniable, unshakable authority. Karima. Voice cold, deliberate, absolute. You assumed I was merely a target. You assumed your local system could protect you. You assumed you were untouchable. You assumed wrong. Lieutenant Mitchell, Officer Reynolds, Officer Donovan, I am not just a senior investigator with the Department of Justice. I am your direct superior. I am the very system you thought you could outsmart. And your reign of impunity ends tonight. The realization hit them like a physical blow. Their faces turned a ghastly, deathly pale. Their entire world, built on lies and intimidation, collapsed around them in an instant. Courtroom day. The air crackles with electric tension, a stark contrast to the opening prologue. This is the full, unedited scene. The jury box is filled, their faces a mixture of solemnity and grim determination. The gallery, packed to overflowing, includes reporters, local citizens, and, in the front row, a stoic Karima Shah. At the defense table, Lieutenant Mitchell, Officer Reynolds, and Officer Donovan sit. Their uniforms crisp, but their faces gaunt, stripped bare of their former arrogance. Mitchell's eyes, once so full of contempt, are now hollow with fear. Captain Davies, looking utterly defeated, sits a few rows back, implicated and awaiting his own fate. The prosecutor, a sharp, unyielding federal attorney, stands before the jury, her voice clear and precise. Prosecutor. Ladies and gentlemen of the jury, the prosecution has presented irrefutable evidence of a systemic pattern of abuse, corruption, and obstruction of justice within the Blackwood Police Department's 17th Precinct. We have heard testimony from victims, seen financial records detailing illicit gains, and witnessed the chilling lengths to which these defendants went to maintain their power. She pauses, making eye contact with each juror. Prosecutor. And now, we present the culmination of this investigation. The federal government, through its dedicated agents, recognized the pervasive nature of this corruption. They understood that to truly dismantle it, they needed to operate from within, to observe the very arrogance that fueled these crimes. She gestures towards a large screen. Prosecutor. We will now play the full, unedited audio and video recording from the night of Lieutenant Mitchell's attempted frame-up of our lead investigator, Karima Shah. This evidence, captured by state-of-the-art federal equipment, speaks for itself. It captures not just their criminal actions, but their contempt for the law, their belief in their absolute impunity, and their final, desperate act of injustice. The courtroom lights dim. The large screen flickers to life, showing the exact scene from Karima's conference room, moments before the false arrest. The audio, crisp and damning, begins to play. Video playback, Karima's conference room, night, flashback. On screen, Mitchell, Reynolds, and Donovan burst into the room. Mitchell's theatrical accusations, the planting of the drugs and cash, Reynolds' eager complicity, it all plays out in vivid detail. Then, Karima's calm, chilling response, her revelation of the federal badge and the blinking voice recorder. The collective gasp from the three officers as their faces drain of color, the sudden realization of their doom. Karima's final, powerful declaration. Karima, VO on screen. No, Lieutenant Mitchell. You just made yours. You see, I am not under arrest. You, however, are. And so are Officer Reynolds and Officer Donovan. This entire conversation, Your pathetic attempt at a frame-up has been recorded. Every word, every action, and thanks to the discreet cameras I had installed, every visual as well. You assumed I was merely a target. You assumed your local system could protect you. You assumed you were untouchable. You assumed wrong. Lieutenant Mitchell, Officer Reynolds, Officer Donovan, I am not just a senior investigator with the Department of Justice. I am your direct superior. I am the very system you thought you could outsmart. And your reign of impunity ends tonight. End video playback. The lights come back up. The courtroom is utterly silent, save for the muffled sobs of a few people in the gallery. The raw audacity, the profound arrogance displayed by the defendants, captured so perfectly, leaves no room for doubt. Mitchell's head is bowed, his shoulders shaking. Reynolds stares blankly ahead, his face utterly devoid of expression, as if his soul has been surgically removed. Donovan looks on the verge of tears. The judge, her face grim, addresses the jury. Judge, ladies and gentlemen of the jury, you have heard the evidence. You have seen the truth. The prosecution rests. The jury deliberates for a remarkably short time. When they return, their verdict is unanimous, swift, and unequivocal. Jury foreperson, standing, voice clear. On all counts, Your Honor, we find the defendants guilty. A wave of relief, followed by a torrent of camera flashes, washes over the courtroom. Mitchell's knees buckle, and he slumps back into his chair, a broken man. Reynolds and Donovan look shell-shocked. The judge begins to read the sentences. Mitchell receives the harshest, a lengthy term in federal prison, reflecting the depth of his corruption and his abuse of power. Reynolds and Donovan receive lesser, but still significant, sentences. Then comes the unexpected. The judge turns her attention to Captain Davies. Judge, Captain Walter Davies, your role in enabling this systemic corruption has been thoroughly exposed by the federal investigation. Your repeated dismissals of legitimate complaints, your active obstruction, and your willful blindness to the suffering of the citizens you swore to protect will not go unpunished. You have been formally charged with obstruction of justice and aiding and abetting. Your immediate termination from the force is effective immediately, and you will face a separate trial for your crimes. Davies, utterly defeated, nods slowly, his own empire crumbling around him. The courtroom buzzes. Mitchell, his eyes hollowed out, lifts his head. His gaze, vacant and desperate, sweeps across the room, finally landing on Karima. Her expression is the same as in the prologue, cold, precise, utterly devoid of triumph. She is merely observing the conclusion of a meticulously executed plan. He sees himself, not as a victim, but as a casualty of his own hubris. He sees the woman he despised, the woman he thought he could crush, as the architect of his ruin. The faces of the untouchables are indeed pale, not just from fear, but from the cold, hard realization that their absolute power was nothing but an illusion, easily shattered by a force they never saw coming. EXT, Blackwood, days later. The Blackwood Police Department, 17th Precinct, looked subtly different. The old, faded sign had been replaced with a crisp, new one. The patrol cars, once gleaming symbols of intimidation, now seemed to carry a different weight, a new promise. The air felt lighter, a collective sigh of relief emanating from the town. The convictions of Mitchell, Reynolds, and Donovan, alongside the ongoing investigations into Captain Davies and other implicated city officials, had sent shockwaves through Blackwood. The story had gone national, a stark reminder of the hidden corruption that could fester in small towns. Int. Blackwood PD, Conference Room Day. Karima Shah sat at the head of the long conference table, no longer surrounded by stacks of files, but by a new team. A diverse group of federal and state officers, brought in to oversee the rebuilding of the 17th Precinct. Among them was a new, interim chief, a woman of color, whose gaze held both resilience and hope. Sergeant Miller, looking visibly relieved and slightly less burdened, sat at the table, now actively assisting the new leadership. Karima, voice calm but firm. The arrests were just the beginning. The real work starts now. We've identified systematic failures in training, hiring, and accountability. Our priority is to implement comprehensive reforms, stricter oversight, bias training, transparent complaint procedures, and genuine community engagement. She looked directly at the new chief. Karima, Chief Hayes, your task is monumental. You're not just rebuilding a department, you're rebuilding trust. Reaching out to the communities that have been historically targeted must be paramount. We need to create a police force that serves, not intimidates. Chief Hayes, nodding with determination. We understand, Investigator Shaw. We won't let you down. The officers who remain here are either new recruits or those who, like Sergeant Miller, were simply too afraid to speak out against Mitchell's regime. They're ready for change. The community is ready for change. Sergeant Miller spoke, his voice stronger than it had been in years. Sergeant Miller. The hardest part was the fear. Mitchell made sure everyone knew their place. Knew what would happen if you spoke up. Your investigation, it broke that fear. Karima offered him a small, genuine smile. Karima, fear is a powerful tool. But justice, when it finally arrives, is even more powerful. It's a cleansing fire. She stood up, gathering a few personal items from her brief. Her mission in Blackwood was nearing its end. EXT, Blackwood, Streets, Day. Karima walked down Main Street, the same street where she had first been humiliated. But now, the street felt different. People weren't averting their gaze when a police car passed. Children played in the park, their laughter echoing freely. The boarded-up storefront Karima had noticed earlier was now being painted, a sign of hopeful renewal. She passed Nia Johnson's family. Mrs. Johnson, her eyes still holding a hint of sadness, but now also a profound sense of peace, offered Karima a small, grateful nod. Marcus, standing taller, held a pamphlet for a new community outreach program. Justice for Nia, though it couldn't bring her back, had brought a measure of peace and accountability. Karima reached her car, parked discreetly a few blocks from the precinct. She opened the door, then paused, looking back at the town. It was still Blackwood, still with its challenges, but it was a Blackwood transformed, awakened from a long, oppressive shadow. Her work was never truly finished. There would always be other Mitchells, other corrupt systems hidden in plain sight. But for now, here, in Blackwood, she had accomplished her objective. She had activated the higher system, allowed it to run its course, and witnessed its profound, cathartic impact. She got into her car, started the engine, and drove away, leaving Blackwood to begin its journey towards genuine justice and equity. The image of Mitchell's terrified, pale face flashed in her mind, a stark reminder that even the most deeply entrenched power could be overthrown, not by violence, but by relentless strategy, unwavering integrity, and the quiet, potent force of the truth.